Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel on criminalization. This is breakout room 1. I see that there are still a lot of unassigned participants, and we're still about 3 minutes away from getting started. While we're waiting, I am going to attempt to share my screen with the slides and see if that works. I see a thumbs up. Thank you very much. Let me just see how I can move these slides. Okay, let me go back. Okay, great. Okay, welcome, folks. This is the session on criminalization. Hey, Bill, nice seeing you. It's been a while. And it's great to see some familiar, friendly faces. Shout outs to everybody who has participated in developing this panel. For example, a big shout out to Bill Sweeney, who's been around the National Vehicle Residency Collective since the very beginning and has been instrumental in planning the last one and this one. We are going to get started in about 2 minutes. Okay, y'all, welcome. Welcome to the newly joining folks. This is breakout room 1, the panel on criminalization. We're going to get started in just a moment. Okay, we're at the top of the hour. Welcome, everyone, to our discussion on criminalization and its effects. You are in breakout room 1, where the discussion will be about the criminalization of vehicle residency. If this is where you want to be, great. We have a wonderful discussion planned for you. If you would like to be in the main room for the discussion about the big tent approach, you can go back to the breakout rooms and transfer there. Can everyone see my slides? Can I get a thumbs up? Perfect. I am going to be your moderator today. You may have met me at the plenary. My name is Tristia Bauman, and I am a civil rights attorney who is currently the directing attorney of the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley. I'm also, along with many of the people in this room and at this summit, a co-founder of the National Vehicle Residency Collective. I want to, before introducing the panelists, lay out a couple of goals for today's discussion, just to give you an orientation to the ground we're hoping to cover in a short 45-minute period. We're going to discuss, what we mean by criminalization, what it looks like, and its impacts. We'll also highlight different advocacy options that people from, various backgrounds can use, whether you're an attorney, a non-attorney advocate, an organizer, a service provider, or a vehicle resident who would be advocating for yourself. We're also going to review some current policies, the good, bad, and the ugly as it relates to that, with an eye toward finding practical solutions. And we're hoping to, highlight some of the things that are working well, and recommended tweaks to make things that aren't working well work better. We also hope that you'll come away from this session educated and feeling informed and ready to take action. So let's meet our awesome panelists. And I want to, welcome everyone here. Everyone's going to have an opportunity to share and to talk, but we're going to be, featuring these panelists in the conversation. And we're going to start first with Jessica Lau and Lisa Darcy, who are in Hawaii. And they're with Share Your Mana, and I really appreciate you both being here. Reggie Meisler, who is a Santa Cruz advocate in Santa Cruz, California. Eric Tars, who's the Senior Policy Director at the National Homelessness Law Center. Special shout out the Law Center, where I worked for a long time. Eric was my very close colleague, and I know that you are going to learn a lot today. So rather than, share these slides, I want to just again, frame the flow of the conversation, because I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other. But we're going to talk about, the impacts of criminalization. What does it look like? So we all are operating from a common understanding of the phrase and all that it covers. Then we're going to look at the, policy and services landscape, move on to advocacy strategies, and then round it out with some discussions of solutions and model communities. So with that, I'd like to first turn it over. And I'd also, before we get started with the actual conversation, I would just welcome everyone who is interested in being on video to make this, more of a community conversation. Please feel free to turn on your video so that we can all be looking at each other as we're having this conversation. Okay, so first, and this is a question for all the panelists, but I'm going to start with Jessica. The phrase criminalization of homelessness. Hi, Jessica.
Hello.
This phrase criminalization of homelessness, I think for a lot of people might invoke a thought that we're talking really narrowly about criminal penalties for residing in vehicles, and that's all that it is. But I think we know that there are a lot of different ways to make it illegal, uncomfortable, and really impossible to live with health, safety, and dignity in a vehicle under the current policy landscape. And so when I go to each of the panelists to discuss this question, what I'm really wondering about is what we refer to as the criminalization of homelessness, this kind of big picture criminalization of homelessness, what it looks like from your perspective. And why don't we start with Jessica? Now, Jessica, you are a person who is a vehicle resident. You live in your vehicle.
Yes, I do.
And can you talk about, what the criminalization of homelessness looks like from your perspective as a person living in a vehicle?
Criminalization in vehicle residency, from my perspective, here in Maui, is very rough. There's not many agencies out here to assist those that are vehicle residents. There's times where you could park at an area. Now we have no parking signs. It's also very hard for a single female to be living in a vehicle. And for me, it was taking that route to live in my vehicle right at the beginning of the COVID-19, because I didn't want, most of us go to vehicle residency, whether we have a set income. I, for one, went to the vehicle residency because I just got to paying off a debt, and I was trying to get into Hawaiian Homes land, and I could not accumulate more debt during the COVID-19. If you remained in your apartment, you would still have to pay at the end. But who goes to show if I'm going to still make the same? Some of us guys here in Hawaii, we go to vehicle residency, whether because we don't have any income that can afford rentals here. We have.
What happened when you got, but like what happened? How did law enforcement interact with you when you lived in your car?
In the beginning, they sent me. I'm one of the plaintiffs from a lawsuit against the county of Maui and the mayor of Maui. And in the beginning of the COVID, they were sending people down to the location where my lawsuit began. I would not go there because I was afraid, because it reminded me of Las Vegas night and day. But going that route, the criminalization, they harass you. And everybody out here is on different track, whether it's mental health issues, whether it's domestic, whether it's sexual abuse, we all on different paths. So you have to approach us differently. You can't come at us at the same way, but living in my vehicle, I've been harassed, been told to move. And now this is like the COVID-19, it's like 4 years later and it's gotten worse. It has not gotten better. We have no safe parking here in Maui.
What
And
happens when you get tickets?
then you got to take time off. For me, I worked through the pandemic. And so when you get cited or you get caught up in the judicial system, then you take time away from my day at work. I mean, and it's just, for me, it was easy because I have a car that runs. But for many out here, they don't have a car that runs, let alone the government phone is being shut down. So their means of transportation or to get or communication with the agencies or anyone out here to come out and help is very, very rare. Many will say they come out and help, and that's not the case. Maui only has one agency that helps. Right now, Maui has 3 divisions of homelessness. Those before the disaster, which is us, those from the disaster, and now you have those that are being affected by this, and they're homeless now because they're being put out from their place to house those of the disaster.
Because of wildfires.
It's very hard because for me, it's like discrimination. You haven't even tended to the problem, which is the first unsheltered homelessness, which is us. But now we are placed on the side while they help those of the disaster. The shelters are full here. There's not many places there's nowhere where a single male can go. You know, and it's very, Maui, before you know it, we're gonna have more categories of people that are being vehicle resident. Some are legal. Most, I would say probably 95% of the vehicles that the residents that they live in, it's not legal, or they don't have a job to be able to keep it legal. So Maui, we are backed up in a corner. Agencies say they come out and help. I've only seen one, which is the health center, come out. They don't put the resources, so I try to find resources so I can pass them on to others that are also staying in their vehicle, so they know where they can go instead of walking to where they have to go or where they were told to go to get there, to find that there's no one there.
Jessica, you're highlighting a lot of the issues that were, touched on in the plenary. There really aren't a lot of places for people to be. You mentioned, for example, if you're a male in Maui, there's no shelter availability. People are also being displaced from housing pursuant to a wildfire. We all heard about the tragic wildfire in Maui, people living in vehicles as a result of that. And you've talked about some of the impacts for those of us who are familiar with the reasons why people might live in vehicles. This may be kind of a very basic question, but for those who really don't understand why a person might live in their vehicle, what are the things that your vehicle can offer you that other options available to you now cannot?
My vehicle offer me safety. When I know, because of what happened to me in my past, that I know I can be able to lock my door and wake up in the car knowing that I was not touched or harmed. And so I choose to stay in my vehicle because for me, it's safety, and mentally and emotionally, it helps me to know that I'm in control of that lock on that door. And so I feel safe where I stay, but they just swept that area just recently. And so that's why I chose to stay in that vehicle. Let alone, Maui do not have motels where you can probably go and stay. The probably cheapest is $400 something, and that's with Kama'aina. So my vehicle is legal. It's my safety, my safe haven where I can call my home, and everything valuable that I have is in that vehicle.
Everyone wants to and deserves to be safe. and live with dignity. And, turning to you, Eric, as a person who's working at the national level, looking at the policy landscape around the country, you've heard from Jessica some of the reasons why people would choose to live in their vehicle. It's the safest option for them, or have no other option but their vehicle for any type of shelter following a disaster or failure of the housing and services infrastructure. It provides an important survival benefit to people. Yet, what we see across the country is not a policy response that supports vehicle residency. We see a policy response that targets and punishes vehicle residency. So given your purview as an attorney looking at the national policy infrastructure, what is driving the growing criminalization of homelessness and vehicle residency?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for the organizers for having me here today. It's really a privilege to be amongst all of you and working alongside you to support vehicle residency for everyone. The drivers of criminalization are a couple-fold. There's sort of a broad public narrative around homelessness and poverty in America. We have this idea that is very deep set in sort of the Protestant work ethic, that if you work hard, then you get ahead. And so the corollary of that is, if you haven't gotten ahead, it must be because you as an individual haven't worked hard, and therefore that's something that others can judge and punish. And so it makes it easy for people to imagine that a policy response to homelessness shouldn't be, oh my goodness, our neighbors are becoming homeless, but rather that it must be because of some flaw with them, and that they need to be punished for that. The dangerous part of this is that elected officials use this narrative to drive their own policies that they're putting in place. And while criminalization is the most expensive way to address homelessness, and it actually makes it worse, it is the most politically expedient way for an elected official to claim that they're doing something about the issues of homelessness, and be able to potentially make a visible difference in one place, to sweep an encampment or move all of the vehicles off of one block or one street corner. But because they haven't actually done anything to help anybody that's living there, we know people still need a place to live. They still need the safety and security that we were talking about just a second ago. And so people are just going to have to move elsewhere. So they haven't done anything to solve the problem, giving people tickets, impounding their cars, all those things is only going to make it harder for those individuals to get out of homelessness if that's what they want to do, or to survive in their vehicles if that's what they want to do. And so it's making the problem worse, but they can be responsive to the individual housed residents in their community that might have been complaining about the parking and other things on that block. So we're kind of in this catch-22 where even though it's making the problem worse, it's still sort of the easiest thing, because an elected official can point to this block that they cleared and say, see, I did a thing, even though and just wait for it to kind of develop elsewhere because they haven't solved the issue. And the biggest driver there is that you don't have to acknowledge the costs of criminalization up front. If you want to provide housing, if you want to provide a safe lot with appropriate services and everything that people need there, you have to acknowledge those costs up front. But with criminalization, you will often see these bills going through, and there's that kind of little fiscal sunshine provision, and it'll say fiscal impact 0. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's an overt lie, but you don't get an apples to apples comparison of the costs of criminalization with the costs of addressing homelessness through more constructive means. If you did get that comparison, where studies have been done, it's 2 to 3 times more expensive to keep people cycling through jails, through the court system, not to mention the human costs of doing it that way. But just the cost to the community, it's 2 to 3 times more expensive to criminalize homelessness than it is to simply provide adequate housing for people. But you can hide those costs, and that's what elected officials unfortunately like to do.
Thank you, Eric. And in the plenary, we heard about the organized effort funded by and in many ways led by the Cicero Institute that even has a model policy that they are pushing primarily at the state level across the country, but it's being adopted by, implemented by local governments in various forms. A point that I would like to make about that, without going back into the ground that Antonia already covered in the plenary, is that when we have policies that approve criminalization of homelessness, we are baking in to our policies the biases that we have against people based on the form of shelter or housing that they inhabit. And there is a symbiotic relationship between the prejudice that people feel, which leads to political pressure to do something about visibly unhoused people in public space, and funded efforts to push model policies to drive people without traditional forms of housing out of public space. It creates a perception that a person is not a community member and is not a person who has any connection to the neighborhoods where they work, live, raise children, and that's a huge problem. And so for that, I want to kind of pivoting from that to some folks who are working locally. And both Reggie and Lisa are working locally with Vehicle Residents as advocates. And Reggie, you're in the Santa Cruz area, Santa Cruz, California. California obviously has a huge unsheltered, unhoused population. And I'm hoping that you can, first address kind of this big picture question from your vantage point. What does criminalization look like in your community?
Yeah, thanks, Tristia. I think the term, so Antonia in the plenary part mentioned that basically cities are doing all kinds of different policies. Some are explicit, some are less explicit, that are basically the goal is to push people outside the borders of the city. And so I think just kind of naming that as ethnic cleansing, because that's what it is, gives you a richer idea of what's happening. Because it's not just that people are being criminalized. It's not just that laws are being written and then it's like, oh, you broke the law. People are getting unlawfully harassed as well. Like, laws are not being fairly even applied to the rights of people living in vehicles. So when your vehicle gets towed, it can be immediately metal scrapped. People can immediately have their stuff thrown away, which is not what tow yards should be doing, right? And people can park in an area and then 10 minutes later get a green tag, which is an abandoned vehicle notice while they're in the car, right? This is not I think people don't understand when we talk about criminalization. We think, oh, somebody created a law that you don't fit in and then you get criminalized. It's even more than that because of this combination of both legal and cultural it's almost a fascistic kind of situation, right? Which is why I think ethnic cleansing is really important to understand the depth of the problem. If you read or you meet someone and ask them, what is it like when your vehicle's getting towed? The police are laughing at people as they're crying, right? I don't think it's you don't understand the level of malice that I think happens in this kind of situation. And I think the other thing to get across here too, is the way cities sort of define homelessness is so it's interesting, right? It's not based on the needs of the person. Because oftentimes people living in like RVs, these are like studio apartments that are mobile. Their needs are being met. In fact, a lot of the people that I speak to, their number one issue is police abuse and harassment, or like even housed neighbors harassment. Not like any service need, not caseworkers, not like, oh, I want to get into different housing. They're fine with their RV. They like their RV actually, particularly because it's rent free in many ways, right? And it's interesting how cities will call RVs unfit for human habitation when they're on a city street. But if you put it in an RV park and then you have to pay exorbitant rent to just be on this land, now it's like sanctioned housing. So you can see the contradictions, right? And it really is, it feels like a colonizer-colonized relationship, more than it feels like, you know, something that is like rational or about public safety or about health and environment. It's really a power and control. And honestly, I think a big part of it is controlling the market, because RVs represent, in particular, a real threat to motels, hotels, short-term rentals, long-term rentals, right? And California, as a sort of political landscape, has historically had a lot of real estate industry control. And so it threatens like a major part of the economy, and a major part of how states legitimize their power, which is by territorializing and controlling the land. And if you can just park and live anywhere and not pay rent, that sort of like undermines both a lot of like our capitalist system as well as our state.
You know, Reggie, you're hitting on a lot of different themes that I want to uplift and highlight. You know, one, making a comparison, excuse me, making a comparison between the processes of using law to target, banish, segregate people based on a characteristic about them does have historical underpinnings. We've seen it. You've used the phrase ethnic cleansing. We've seen it in a number of different ways historically throughout the world, and certainly the United States has a long history of use of law for those purposes. I also want to highlight the point you made about the malice, and what I would add is as often, or at least commonly also, indifference, that bureaucrats who are or government officials who are enforcing these policies exhibit during enforcement, despite the really acute harms that people are experiencing during enforcement. A gentleman named Michael McConnell, who films in San Diego, posted a video that I'll really never forget. It was a gentleman with a tracheotomy who was being kicked out of his RV that he used as his only form of shelter because it was not registered, and under California state law, an unregistered vehicle can be towed and stored, and functionally for a lot of people that will mean the permanent loss of the vehicle for failure to register that vehicle. Registration can be expensive. I don't know what the circumstances were that did not allow him to register vehicles, but we know that tickets, unpaid tickets, for example, can make a person not be able to register. And of course, folks living in vehicles are targeted for increased ticketing and even discriminatory selective enforcement of ticketing under laws that are generally applicable. This gentleman, was losing everything. His home, his shelter, his form of transportation, and all of his property. And he was speaking to Michael McConnell, who was filming it, and he was speaking to him through, the voice box without knowing more about how a person with a tracheotomy, would speak. And he was scared. He was devastated. He was confused about what he would do next. And he was sitting on the side of the road, just holding himself and rocking. And if you just turn the camera slightly to the right, like 1 or 2 feet to the right, you would have no idea that that was happening with this individual, because there were multiple police officers and others, tow company personnel, who were walking around like, they were just having an average day at work. So that malice, on the spectrum to indifference is really common. And I wanted to lift that up as well. And turn to you, Lisa, because you're also doing advocacy in a community, in the community of Maui. And we've talked about what criminalization looks like, and I would invite you to include that in your answer. But I'd like to transition to the what's not working. We've heard a little bit about how these laws are enforced. We've heard a bit about how there aren't a lot of alternatives. Yet we simultaneously hear, especially in the popular media, that there are places where people can go, there are services, and people who are not accepting them are service resistant. And then they just don't want any help. So, my main question to you is, from your vantage point, are the services and solutions that are offered in your community, are they in fact viable?
Oh my gosh. So thank you for this. And it's an honor to be here again in everyone's company. Just for the sake of some perspective very quickly, it's impossible for the Share Your Mana Advisory Committee, which we're both on, to speak on this topic without discussing racism and without discussing that homelessness is a mainland concept and not a Hawaiian concept. There's no such thing as being homeless in Hawaii if you're Hawaiian, because this is your land, this is your ancestral land. So it was made very clear to me when I first started working in this community that homeless is not a word that we use. And that's a really important thing to understand, is that it's really about having safety from the elements and a place to store your belongings, right? So that said, if you really look at it through that lens, the observations that I have made over and over really are reflected in what has already been said. One is that it's normalized, it's accepted, and it's approved to actually abuse people in poverty. And there isn't the concept, nobody ever asked the question you just asked is, what are the real structures that are being provided to people? And over and over again, Share Your Mana and our whole team is constantly saying, bring dumpsters, have garbage, have bathrooms, have basic human infrastructure. And then people will be able to participate almost as a human being. And whenever anybody comes to the meeting, I said, don't expect them to be in a good mood. Like, you had a warm bed, you got to make your coffee in the morning, you got to wash your face and brush your teeth. If you don't have this basic stuff, or the cops have been knocking on your window at 2 a.m. and shining the light in your face, you're not going to maybe make your meeting. You're not going to be able to perform as a normal human being. And yet this community over and over and over again has not fulfilled its requirement to provide safety from the individuals who are supposed to be providing the safety. In fact, oftentimes they're the ones who are harming, and the structure harms. Our mayor has made promises to provide space for people face to face, and has reneged on every time that we have met with them, which is very rarely. And when you have your trusted elected officials and your agencies saying, and what it's really what they're not saying. Our agencies don't ever really even we have once a month meetings with the Alliance, and they're over early. It's a 1 hour meeting. And oftentimes the meetings end early, once a month. So you can see none of these issues are addressed. So that lack of addressing is one of those very subtle systemic exclusions where people's voices aren't brought in, and where it's completely and utterly ignored, and therefore it's minimized. And when that happens, the onus is put on Jessica, it's put on all of the individuals, that they have to come and they have to demand to be heard, because there's no space, they're not included. Their agencies, we're the only agency that goes out with our phone and documents and helps bring people's voice to meetings, helps brings people's voice to solution making. And our agencies aren't doing that because they're negating that this is an actual problem. And it really, again, revolves back in, I think, pretty much into racism, because if you don't own land and you can't accrue wealth and you don't have internet, like what we have to do to get on a meeting is 14 cartwheels and 3 backflips because of the financial cost of the lack of technology, which we don't have, and things get broken, stolen. We don't have locations that are safe and protected from the elements. What Jessica didn't mention is people who are residing in their vehicles need the protection from the sun. There is a narrative that Maui is paradise. If you don't have cover from the sun, your life expectancy drops very significantly. That is no joke. That is, people end up in the emergency room, cycling in and out, the cost of that. We don't have protection from the elements. People don't have places to store their property. As we know, we just went to the Supreme Court and they upheld it here in Hawaii. Without that, and without the agencies actually seeing people as these are like realistic needs, it's the agencies actually make the individuals invisible. And I think one of the things that what we have done and that does work is we've done a lot of videos. We've done a lot of education. We actually, one of my first videos was, do you want to live this way? And everyone's like, hell no. And because there's this huge narrative that everybody wants to live this way. And I was like, and it was perpetuated by agencies and by our elected officials who haven't spent 5 minutes in anyone's slippas over here. So it is absolutely inaccurate, and it's immoral, I think, and unethical and unprofessional to represent people without them sitting next to you or without them in front of you with the mic. And that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's why we've been able to have so much traction, is that it's really about sitting with Jessica and interpreting what she means, when she says, I can't, I got to stay in my car. And what she's saying is I lost all my income in COVID and I couldn't afford my rent. And so I know that because we've gotten to know each other and we sit side by side. There's this translation that needs to happen once you get to a certain level of stress in your life where you don't translate your needs, or you may not even ever have the tools to do that. So you can't share it on the spot and if you feel pressured. So it's really this grassroots sitting side by side work that needs to happen, which I'm really always trying to inspire our agencies to do more of, versus get in their car, drive out, wave at people and say they did their outreach, versus, I've slept side by side with people, and I've been there at 2 a.m. when cops are giving people tickets. And we have been courageous enough to post that through social media and through newsletters to say, this is what we're experiencing. And you need to understand that everybody here wants something dignified, and they're trying. And even to just get up in the morning and have a decent day is way more. You just can't even understand the level of barrier that's there. And anyway, so I think that's kind of what we're trying to do, is really we want to challenge the normalizing of the abuse, and the normalizing of people want to live with trash around them, whether their vehicle runs or not, or that people actually just want to live like this. It's certainly not been my experience anywhere that I have worked with people. And so I think it's really important to name it historically from the United States, how actually peoples have been able to have land and live safely. And if you don't have land, you can't, it's everything continues to be in that you're not safe if you don't own land or own. And of course, that's again a cultural here in Maui. That's a whole nother discussion, is owning land. Like, people don't own land here, and yet that's a mainland concept that has come and displaced. And there's a disproportionate amount of Hawaiians that are incarcerated and in these conditions. And that is that's a tragedy.
You and Reggie both, mentioned themes that really emerge from settler colonialism, things about, what it means to own land that is, land that belongs to all life, what housing means, can vehicles be forms of housing? I think, Lisa, you touched on some things that I'd like to transition to now. We've got about 10 minutes left in this conversation. And what I'd really like for us to focus on in our remaining time is what can we do? Because, we've now heard criminalization looks, in many ways the same from your various vantage points. It has a lot of ways that it manifests, and it acutely harms people, depriving them of safety and dignity. And it is another example of the type of dehumanizing policy response that we have seen implemented across time and across identities. So, knowing all that, what can we do about it? What are some of the advocacy strategies? What are some of the examples? And if there are no good examples, what are the things that we would want to see, given our vantage point, to change? And I'd like to start with you, Jessica. What are some of the things that you have been working on in Maui, recommendations that you have made that would make a real difference for you as a person living in your vehicle?
The recommendation. The resources that is given to those that are residing in their vehicle needs to be accurate. A lot of the resources that they're giving is not accurate. And so you have many walking because their vehicle is not running, walking to these locations to get there to find out that the information of the resource that was just given is not valid. I've asked there's only one agency that pretty much oversees all the sheltering, the placing for those that are living in their vehicles. And my experience with them, it was true. They took they picked who they wanted to, because they left me on hold for 18 months. And then when the lawsuit came up, then they try to coincide with me and work beside me. I am housed now, but I'm out in the street. I'm paying my rent, but in the street, because I'm fighting for those that is still out here in the street. So for the last 5 months, I've been right where they just swept, trying to, alongside with Lisa and Sonia, trying to guide these, because this is a whole different generation of people that are residing in their vehicle. It's a younger generation. These guys will fight and create chaos, and it don't need to be that way. But for us, they need to have the resources. They need to have more agencies to help. The way I see it from the very beginning, the more people we have out there that are willing to help, then the more we can be able to branch out and we can cover Maui County. But it seems like the politics only want this one agency. Now, my thing is, you building all these places, they built this small pallet houses for those that were homeless. And just out of the blue, you put that in a park where kids play to begin with. And now your excuse to take them down, all 100 of them, where they only put 22. They said they had 100 pallets, but they only put 22 pallets up. They took it down. What happened to the money from there? Where did those pallets go? Those that were out there could have used that, but to my experience, I've come to see that they take it, they jump on it, and they know it's not going to work. They want it to fall. Then they just grab it, push it underneath the rug, and just expect us to just go away. But it's not going to happen. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So we need the researchers to be able to be accurate. We need the people out there, because for 18 months, I watched the agency just drive right past me. And then when they started to hunt me down, I hid from them for 3 weeks, because I was like, and so I have this thing, here comes the bounty hunter. But they say just recently they helped out 22 people. They helped out 2 people.
So getting more accurate information. Yeah, thank you.
And locations, more shelter.
What I'm hearing from folks in Maui is some of the strategies that you have used are narrative building, having more people tell their stories, lawsuits, organizing and that community building is aimed towards some of the things that you've highlighted, Jessica, a better services infrastructure, real data, and it sounds like also, more true investment and prioritization in the, by the local government. And it's not enough to just hold meetings. They really need to be invested in addressing, the issue as a priority.
And
So
documenting. That's all I've got to say. Document everything.
Documenting things as an advocate and making sure, that's a great tip. And I know that we are, rounding out, but I will just say the tip of documenting is really important for all things, both for policy advocacy. It can be really important for data and evidence gathering if you do decide to move forward with a lawsuit. And it helps with storytelling. So I'd like to go to Reggie and then end it with Eric. Knowing that we just have, a few minutes left, Reggie, are there additional strategies that you are using in Santa Cruz or that you would recommend to get toward real solutions for vehicle residents in California?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, I think kind of touching on what Jessica is doing, which I think is exactly right in my opinion, is that we need to foster relationships between people and tenants and living in homes, and basically create sort of deep neighborhood relationships if possible, so that people living in vehicles are seen as part of their communities, and they have connections that can be activated into direct action if the police try to harass them. Also, people living in vehicles being in neighborhoods is safer than being in like commercial zones. So if we can get people into neighborhoods, police are less likely to do big sort of harmful actions there. And one of the things I like to do is I go to the college students in like Santa Cruz, right, where there is no housing, and the housing that is there is like $3,000+ a month for a 1-bedroom or even a studio. And I tell them, like, live in a vehicle. Like, I straight up tell them, because like, even if you live in an RV, you get a ticket every single night of the month. That's $50 times 30 days. That's $1,500 a month. That's like half a market rate rent to live in an RV and get ticketed every night for doing so. So like, college students, economically, this is good for you. And in terms of like a radical movement, that's like who can really push this over the top. Because college students, we're seeing them risk everything for Palestine right now. And these like young people, they see things, they reject normalization of the status quo and how these like governments work. And I think ultimately like that kind of grassroots mobilization and mutual aid and people just coming together and teaching each other and meeting and like talking about their needs and trying to like, which we see in Santa Cruz. Like I've seen people teach each other how to do solar panel installations, teach each other how to do engine repairs, because, people are smart. People are like incredibly technical, and I don't think we give them enough credit. We think of people as just victims of poverty who live in vehicles, but they're actually an incredibly skilled population that have a lot to offer in a mutual aid community.
Thank you. And let's go to Eric for kind of the last piece of this session. I realize we're at time. Let's take just a couple of minutes to hear from Eric at the national level. You've heard a number of different things, a better services infrastructure that is supported by data and definitions that would include vehicles as a form of emergency shelter that can be accepted into a services infrastructure, and also vehicles as a form of affordable housing when it makes sense in a housing infrastructure. What can be done, or what is being done at the national level to support these solutions?
Well, I think as Antonia framed it in the first session, there's defensive work and there's offensive work. And we need to do both at the same time because when people are criminalized, we know, as we've heard, it makes people insecure, it makes people have to move around and expend all sorts of energy on paying tickets, on trying to find a safe place to be, that can't then go to advocacy for themselves, and to being part of a meeting like this, and to being part of a movement. And so for a long time, the homelessness movement in America has kind of neglected the criminalization piece and said, we don't want to focus on that. We just want to focus on getting people into housing. But I think it's really important that we do that defensive work to stop criminalization of homelessness in order to facilitate people being able to not have to focus on that daily survival piece, so that then they can become advocates. So we're doing that at the Supreme Court right now, as Anthony was saying. We're going to be putting forth some federal legislation that would prevent criminalization of homelessness. It's not going to be perfect. Unfortunately, as we've heard, communities are kind of endlessly creative in how they try to get around laws or court decisions that would stop them from criminalizing. But we can try and get that done to kind of level set and make sure that we're building up and not going down further. And then the bigger thing is that we need adequate housing for everybody. Housing is a basic human need. It's a basic human right. And we need to put in place the financial and policy framework so that everybody gets to enjoy that basic right. And coming out of the Supreme Court case, as Antonio was saying, we're going to have sort of this big ask to create housing, universal access to housing for everybody who needs it. And as part of that, we can also be thinking about sort of these interim solutions or even permanent solutions for people who do choose to live in their vehicles. But for many people who are living in vehicles, I think they wouldn't be there but for the lack of adequate, affordable housing. And so we got to make sure that people are able to access the kind of housing that they want to be able to access, to be able to live their lives fully, respecting their dignity and choice in the matter. So that's we're working at the federal level to do that. We'll also have some template legislation for state level reforms to try and do the same sorts of things to fight against these template Cicero bills that Tristia had mentioned. And so that's we have to take this battle to the streets, to the halls of Congress, to the halls of the state legislatures, and into the courts, and kind of do a full court press in order to make sure that we're bringing all the resources, all the tools on behalf of the movement.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our panelists for your comments, and to the audience for allowing us to go over time. There's going to be a lot more opportunity to discuss criminalization and other issues that were raised here today. So thank you very much, and looking forward to more conversation throughout the weekend.